Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to the MCHSA seminar for this evening. MCHSA stands for the Maternal and Child Health Student Association, and we're a student association that's connected with the University of Alabama at Birmingham. We are a group of people that represent a bunch of different schools on campus, undergraduate as well as graduate students, all with a variety of majors, but interest in maternal and child health. And so we have monthly meetings. We have quarterly seminars. We participate in community service activities. If you are a student at UAB, we would love to have you join. And you can go to the MCHSA page on Engage, and there's an application to join at that point. But I want to welcome you to tonight's seminar in particular, and I'm going to pass it over to our MCHSA president. She's going to introduce herself and our speaker tonight.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Chidiman Dibisi-Olwavu, and I currently serve as the president of the MCHSA. And it is my pleasure to welcome you all to our seminar this evening, Becoming a Social Media Influencer in Your Spaces. Now more than ever, it is critical that we are building networks that not only inform, but also connect us as a community. Social media offers one avenue to accomplish this, but also offers powerful opportunities for people to amplify their expertise, connect with broader audiences, and shape conversations within their fields and amongst the general public. Today's speaker joins us with nearly 40,000 followers on Instagram and also serves as the Associate Dean of Access and Engagement at the University of Alabama. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bertha Hidalgo.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, and could not agree more with your statement regarding the importance of how one communicates, and in this case, as we're talking about today, how to embrace becoming a social media influencer in your own spaces. And so I want to encourage us to have a conversation. Please feel free, for those of you that are joining live, to interrupt me and ask questions as we go. Otherwise, I think I've listed my email at the end of today's presentation, but if I didn't, I'm the only Hidalgo on UAB campus, Hidalgo. So feel free to find me, and we can chat and nerd out on all things social media influencing. So I'm gonna share my slides so that we can go ahead and get started with today's presentation. And so I, you know, becoming a social media influencer is not something I planned. I have become well known on social media. As noted, I have amassed a following on Instagram specifically. I have a presence on other social media apps, but I would argue that Instagram is the place where I was born an influencer, or was introduced to the life of social media influencing, and really gained speed and an understanding of what it means to become well known in these spaces, but also to find your voice. And I think the latter part is what I want to communicate to you. So, what is becoming a social media influencer in your own spaces like, and why is it important? And I think it's important for me to share with you that there are a number of reasons why people become immersed in social media spaces, and why they decide, maybe intentionally or not intentionally. Not intentionally was the case for me, to become influencers in their own respective spaces. But for you all who are interested in maternal and child health, it really increases your own visibility in your field. So for those of you that are aspiring to be on the tenure track or join the faculty at some research intensive university in the future, do research, or maybe you're practicing, you're a public health practitioner, it really increases the work that you do and provides you an opportunity to make connections, to expand the breadth of your work and the reach of your work. The opportunities for collaboration and even funding that have come as a result of me being in these spaces have been so numerous at this point. I will admit, and I always tell this when I'm giving talks related to this topic, that anyone who's followed me on Instagram knows that I got my start on Instagram as a fashion influencer. Now, I did not set out to be a fashion influencer. Many of you may be too young to remember that when Instagram began, some people on Instagram, particularly women, would share their daily hashtag OOTD, outfit of the day. And at the time, I was a postdoc, and I really fell in love with this idea of following accounts that would give me ideas for what to wear on a daily basis, how to grow my wardrobe, how to build a wardrobe affordably so that I dress, business casual or business formal for whatever meeting I was attending. And started sharing my own at some point, like really stepped into courage and started doing that for myself. And one thing led to another, and a following grew. And in 2019, I decided to take a pivot and switch and rebrand my Instagram from fashion to science communication. The important point here is that this third bullet on influence and leadership, when I joined Instagram, I was a postdoc, and I felt very insecure about my knowledge and what I could contribute in terms of knowledge and advice, even when it came to being a scientist, or being a woman in science, or being a Latina in science. So I'm of Mexican background myself. And so because I did not feel comfortable and confident in sort of embracing those identities, but felt more confident sharing something a little bit more frivolous and sort of cursory in my life, it allowed me to find myself and my voice and grow into confidence. And soon thereafter, the following that I amassed on Instagram really became a community of support, and really embraced my pivot into science communication. And so when my rebrand to science communication happened in 2019, it really allowed me the opportunity to then really step into this third bullet, the influence and leadership, improving my communication skills for science specifically. And then my advice to you in terms of like why it's important to even consider becoming an influencer in your own space on social media is that ultimately what we're here to do, if you're publishing in journals, if you're out in the community talking to groups, if you're going to national conferences, if you're organizing a seminar like this, you're really trying to advance and disseminate knowledge related to maternal and child health. And so social media really allows you to do that in a way that expands the reach and breadth of the work that you do. So I have 5 recommendations, 5 steps for how one does this. And we can talk about all of the things that come with the territory once we get through these 5 steps. So if you're interested, and I highly recommend that you consider it if it's not something that was previously on your radar. So step 1 to becoming a social media influencer in your own space is to establish core elements of a personal brand. And you may think like, well, what is a personal brand, and why are there marketing principles as part of this presentation? But it's really important to recognize that what people are drawn to on social media is what they can gain from your account. Are you entertaining them? Are they learning something from you? Are they shocked by you, right? There are a variety of reasons why people tune into accounts on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, what have you. For those of us that are in these academic spaces, oftentimes, unless you're going to start off like me in the fashion space, oftentimes it's about sharing your expertise, highlighting that knowledge and skills. Sharing the value that you bring to the table. So communicating your principles and passion, demonstrating what impact you're going to have on the field or the world. So showcasing your contributions to society and to science. And then really thinking about the visual core elements that contribute to your personal brand. So how you visualize what your expertise is, what your values are, and what impact you bring to the table and to the world. And these four things, expertise, values, impact, and visuals, all contribute to how you present yourself to the world. This is not dissimilar to how we do this in person, right? How you dress on a day-to-day basis. We, once upon a time, had an associate dean that would wear all black. Those of us who were taking statistics at the time and learning about Bayesian statistics and priors would talk about, and he wouldn't mind me saying this, this was David Allison, who's now dean at the School of Public Health at Indiana. And, when you're studying Bayesian statistics, you're trying to understand what your prior is, right? Like, what is the probability of something happening based on prior evidence? And what is the probability that he was going to walk into the building in an all black outfit? That was part of his personal brand. And why did he wear all black? Because it helped sort of rid his mind of thinking time and energy about what they were going to wear that day. And so wearing all black really eliminates a lot of time and energy spent on figuring out what outfit one wears that day. That was part of his personal brand. So step 2 in defining your brand are questions that are really important to ask yourself. So social media influencing is only effective when we're passionate about what we're talking about. When I was in the fashion and in the fashion content creation, I was really passionate about shopping on a budget because I was a grad student, then postdoc, with not a lot of money. I was also a mom at the time, and so I was really passionate about building fun, affordable, but really professional outfits that one could wear in academic settings. And so one of my more popular posts was finding dupes for all of the luxury goods that you would like to buy but can't afford to buy. Another really popular post at the time was how to buy 3 days worth of conference outfits for $20. And so some of that involved thrifting. But I was really passionate about the shopping affordably, sustainably, and really having fun with it. Fashion influencing really allowed me to tap into being creative, learning how to work with brands, so collaboration. And it was really interesting because at the time, when you build collaborations with brands, a lot of it, especially if you're really eager to collaborate with certain brands, meant that you were having to cold email or send emails to these brands and representatives of brands so that you can create collaborations. And so the unique skills that I was bringing to the table for that was all of the time that I had spent learning how to write grants and learning how to pitch papers and writing hypotheses. And so I had this wealth of knowledge that normally would help me do really well in science, was helping me really secure these brand deals. And so I became known for being a petite fashion blogger, so I'm only 5'2", being a fashion blogger in the Latina space, which there weren't many of at the time. And then ultimately, because I was also a scientist or a budding scientist, and also had an interest in fashion, the mantra sort of became that science and intellect and an interest in sort of fun, frilly things are not mutually exclusive. Like women can be all things, right? And we don't have to be pigeonholed or boxed into one unique thing. We can be multi-passionate, we can be multi-hyphenate. And so that concept, like that idea, that brand, is what led to a number of collaborations and ultimately landed me on the cover of a fashion magazine at the time called Redbook. So what I want to encourage you to do, if you're actively listening and you're thinking, gosh, like maybe this is something I'd like to do, or you already have a presence on social media, but you're in the processes of sort of maybe rebranding or refining yourself, ask yourself what it is that you're passionate about at this time. And maybe that's not a question that you've asked yourself so far. What unique skills or expertise do you offer? What do you want to be known for? And then you can use the information, the answers to those questions to craft a personal mission statement. So communicating your brand, I get a lot of questions about, well, what are the appropriate platforms in which one should be present? And I will say that this has changed quite significantly from when I first got on the social media scene. There are a lot more spaces to join these days. And so I started out with Instagram and Facebook, but there are places like TikTok where people have amassed very large followings. Twitter, Blue Sky is the one that I recently joined that I'm getting really excited about. Another place that I have explored a lot less, but I think has a lot of potential for communicating about your science or what you practice in the field or something you're passionate about, but in a more professional context, is LinkedIn. So typically, for those of us that are in academic audiences, your offline presence involves conferences and networking events, publishing in journal articles, maybe public speaking at the local, maybe even national level, and then some community engagement as well. But there are other places like social media, as I've mentioned, where the reach can be astronomical. And for me, it proved to be during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I really became known as a science communicator because I was so active in creating content about COVID-19, how to protect yourself and your families and your loved ones. Being on Instagram and sharing the content that I was creating there, to some degree also Twitter, but for the most part Instagram, landed me on Good Morning America. I was quoted in the New York Times, sometimes monthly. I often joined morning newscasts for local affiliates of news stations. And so it really led to this really explosion of presence because of my participation in content creation on social media. The other thing that I would encourage you to do, even if you decide not to become a social media influencer, is to come up with an elevator pitch. This is super important. And in all of the courses that I teach, clinical and translational science, dissemination implementation science, maybe less so courses in epidemiology, though I think they're equally as important there, is to think about what your elevator pitch is. So what are the key components? Who are you? What do you do? And why does it matter? And so in the context of maternal and child health, I came up with this statement that could apply to someone who's a really passionate doula. So I would say, and this is actually a much longer elevator pitch than I might suggest, but nonetheless, I think has some key components. So I am a doula and maternal health advocate dedicated to empowering parents with evidence-based guidance, emotional support, and advocacy for better birth experiences. Through my platform, I break down myths, share real life experiences, and provide expert-backed tips on pregnancy, birth, and postpartum wellness. My goal: to ensure every parent, regardless of background, feels confident, informed, supported in their journey. Let's build a community where maternal and infant health is prioritized and every birthing person feels seen and heard. You can envision that this could be a pinned post on Instagram, Facebook, maybe a pinned post on Blue Sky, and it really tells people who you are, what you're passionate about, and why it matters to you, but also why it should matter to them. Step 4, building credibility. So this is where it's really important that you're passionate about the topic, but that you're doing diligent work to make sure that you're transparent, that you're accurate, that you're timely, that you're respectful in these spaces as well. Yes, we all already know that when you publish in academic journals or you present at scientific conferences, that you're aiming to publish quality work. The same holds true for content creation. Just like we seek opportunities to collaborate in science, you do so also in social media spaces. So asking someone to promote your post, or oftentimes the way it works is that you'll reach out to someone and ask them to collaborate on a post. So that's one easier way to not commit someone else to sharing your content if it's not necessarily appropriate, or if it's not relevant to the content they normally share. Professional organizations, newspapers, online news outlets, there are a number of places that are actively looking for content to share. And so to the extent that if you're a content creator, that you're actively sharing the content that you're creating and making them aware of the work that you're doing, really allows you to expand the reach and breadth of everything that you're working on. In these spaces, it's also really important to develop strong mentorship or a mentoring network. And so I found people that had been on Instagram much longer than I had. One of the original fashion influencers that helped answer a lot of questions for me was Dulce Candy. And she was one of the original fashion influencers, went on to have a book and mega brand deals, became really well known in the fashion influencing space. And she was one that I really leaned on to better learn the social media space. Also connecting with community members. So, be proactive, compliment people, reach out, have conversations, promote their work. If you're working with community members or patients, share your work with them. These are engaged audiences that, yes, you may be in contact with on a one-on-one basis in person, but they too have lives and networks on social media. And so share your work and connect with people, any and all who are affected by or do work in maternal and child health. Step 5 of this is visual branding. So we have sessions at UAB where you can go and get a professional headshot. Branding is also about authenticity. And so if a truly professional headshot, like one that you would get at UAB, does not fit with your brand, think about other opportunities to promote photographers that are in your space or who are aligned with the work that you're doing. And that's one great way to elevate their work as well. More pragmatic are things like consistent use of fonts, colors, logos in presentations or in your content creation. For those of you that are Taylor Swift fans, you know that when she posts photos, they all have this like really similar filter, sort of like antique feel. And so that if you see a picture in that filter, that it might be one of hers. Other examples include I don't know if any of you have taken a look at the Nutter Butter account on TikTok, but it's a little bit out there. And so if you see any content like that, people will immediately maybe think, oh, that's the crazy Nutter Butter account. And then you can translate that to the work that you do in print, right? Like your posters, your publications, your CV, or take that formatting, that sort of more formal formatting, and adopt it to the social media and content creation that you're doing. Social media for budding influencers, the do's. Do share insights from your research and work. Now, probably what we'll do during the Q&A session, and again, feel free to interrupt if you have any questions about this, but we are in a really interesting time where science to some extent has become politicized, and there are topics that are very polarizing. And so when I've given talks like this in the past, I get questions about, well, I might be setting myself up for attacks, or I don't feel safe sharing the work that I do. And so in those cases, I think that you can also be very intentional about how you advance knowledge and how you share that work, even if it's not coming from your own personal accounts. UAB media, pitching a story to a news outlet anonymously, or speaking as an individual and not a person that is affiliated with an institution, is another way to do it. You can do a lot of content creation and sharing also at the local level. And so you can print your content creation. You can create a newsletter, for example. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I created a lay person's newsletter to share what I was learning about COVID-19 in real time with my family, my parents, my cousins, people that have nothing to do with my academic environment, which led then to the creation of my blog, in science communication, previously used to share fashion information. Also completely recommend following key figures in your field. So who are the leaders in maternal child health, or in the subfield of maternal and child health? Get to know them. I got to know people in the field of epidemiology that I might never otherwise have crossed paths with. Some people I've become really great friends with. Other people I know well enough that I can reach out to if I have a question. That would not have happened without social media. For your content creation, really important that you don't overload your content with jargon, acronyms, nuanced or niche language that you use in your science or in your field. Number two, I cannot emphasize enough: do not engage in unproductive debates. This can be really difficult, especially if you're really passionate about a topic. The way that I saw social media influencing about COVID-19 was that it was my job to put the information out there. And to some extent, I would engage in conversation with, for questions that that really related to the content that I was sharing, but I really refuse to engage in sort of these debates that people try and get you into, especially about topics like COVID-19 and vaccination. There are examples of really effective Twitter or LinkedIn posts and profiles that you can access, and I'm happy to share. I am, as I mentioned, present on different social media platforms. I am no longer on Twitter. It started out because I got locked out of my account after it became X, and then I was never able to gain access again. And so it's just an account that's been sitting there for some time now, probably a couple of years at this point. But one of the things that I've done very consistently is that as soon as I decided that I wanted to become Dr. Bertha Hidalgo on Instagram, I immediately went to all of the other platforms I was on and changed my user URL, my handle, if it wasn't already, to Dr. Bertha Hidalgo or Bertha Hidalgo or some variation of that, so that if people wanted to find me on that platform, they wouldn't have a hard time finding me. And that is exactly what I did when TikTok came on the scene. I was not an early adopter of TikTok, but I was now I'm a user. And so it was really helpful to have secured the handle on the TikTok account as soon as it became well known. Same thing was with Blue Sky. As soon as I learned about Blue Sky, I went on and created an account. I haven't really used it. I think I now have some followers because one of my posts went viral a couple of weeks ago. But now I have a reserved name. So if you have any interest and you think there's any chance in the future you might be interested in social media influencing, I highly recommend that as a tip. Also highly recommend staying authentic. You really need to align your brand with your personality and values. This can change over time, especially if you experience really rapid and drastic growth. But ultimately, I think some accounts and some content creators get into a lot of trouble when they let other people create content for them or be the voice of, or respond to comments on their behalf. I've always taken the time to ensure that I'm the voice behind the accounts, that I'm the one responding to comments, I'm responding to DMs. It's a lot of work, but I do think that it's important and really for me allowed me to align my personality and values with my brand. Be honest about your strengths and growth areas. I think also be very honest about what you know and don't know. We do not have to be experts on all aspects of the field that we're communicating about. And then show vulnerability when appropriate, or if you made a mistake, shared something that was misinformation or disinformation, really important to own up to that as well. There are a few case studies of really successful science communication accounts, like Neil deGrasse, of course, which a lot of people know, popularizing astrophysics. Jennifer Doudna, who does a lot of public engagement. Andrea Ghez, who's a Nobel laureate in physics, and then other lessons learned from branding strategies. I take a lot of lessons from the fashion and other content creation areas. But of course, science communication is one that has a lot of great examples as well. Is there such a thing as overbranding and underbranding? I'm not quite sure. I mean, I think there could be, certainly with cancel culture and becoming too extreme in content creation, that's certainly a risk, but certainly I think something that is very manageable. This second point I put in here because I personally struggled so much with imposter syndrome when I first joined the social media space. And when you're in training or when you're earlier in your career, I think that this can be a hindrance in some regards. Also, managing criticism or negative feedback can be really difficult, especially if you're talking about very polarizing topics. This last part actually was the reason I took a very extended break from social media, because I got doxxed in 2022, at the beginning of 2022, and that was super scary. But nevertheless, I think a lot of good work can happen online, and there are some really important reasons why one would consider becoming an influencer on social media. You can, as you build your brand, think about auditing your online presence. So I have a Google alert for my name. So anytime it comes up on a blog or publication or social media content, I'll immediately know what it was. And if I need to do any damage control or PR, that allows me to sort of stay on top of it. There's a lot of work in the social media space that can contribute to your CV and your online profiles. And so I think you can think very strategically, intentionally about how that is to work. And then that drafting of the elevator speech is so important because it can help you not only with your content creation on social media, but also in how you sell your science or the work that you're doing in the community and so forth. Not unlike what you do in academia, for social media content creation, you want to set short and long-term branding goals. What I want to discourage you from is focusing too much on the follower count. I would be happy if I had one follower and I made a difference in that one follower's life. because of the science communication that I shared, or because of the fashion content creation that I was curating. For today's talk, if only one of you joined and it made a difference in how you think about social media influencing, I would be happy. I would be over the moon. And so don't focus on the numbers, because when we lean too far into that online sort of celebrity status mindset, that can become really damaging and really affect the way in which your brand comes across. So I do encourage you to also invite questions and discussion when you're posting on social media. To some extent, you can think about whether or not you want to provide contact details for follow-up. I think it's very safe to share Instagram handles or Facebook URLs. But to the extent that you can think about extending and sustaining the ways in which you continue to communicate with people, I think is worth considering. So I think that allows us some time for a Q&A. This is my email. I did add it at the end. I wasn't sure that I had, but welcome any questions that you may have. And I really thank you for your attention and engagement.
I have one question.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is always when I see post from Instagram, there is like lot of ideas in my mind. But thank you so much to just articulate it well. Now
Oh,
I
good.
just the, like what I have to do when I have this question, like what I want and yeah, how can I do it? So thank you so much for the session.
Yes, you're so welcome. So I had a professional executive coach probably starting in 2021, maybe 2022. And because I was still at that time suffering with such deep imposter syndrome, one of the pieces of advice that she offered me was that when you can't find confidence, you should step into courage. And it is very scary to dive into social media and to share with complete strangers your knowledge or your opinions or your interpretation of the science or whatever it may be. But I will say that there are spaces online where you can really find good community, and that will allow you to find your voice. And there's a lot of room for error and experimentation as you create that content. So if you've at all considered it, I highly encourage you try it.
Thank you so much for this.
Yes, you're so welcome.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for this presentation. I think it's my second time listening to this. I had an opportunity to listen to attend similar seminar at Harvard University last year in spring,
Yes.
organized by Fulbright. And one of the questions that I actually couldn't get answer that satisfies me, I would say ask here is that what if you are by anticipation putting up a topic that is a bit sensitive and somebody who is, for example, I'm a medical doctor and somebody who's also maybe better trained than me come and comment opposite of what I actually say, like throws off what I've said. It kind of like sometimes you anticipate in a scientific platform like research publications is different. You
Yeah.
brought in evidence and you try to bring in your arguments. But in social media, you have a lot of people who just see what strike out and just stick to it. And it might completely like remove your credentials out of you because somebody came and just contradicts you completely. And that fear exists. And I know a lot of doctors don't comment anything because they don't want to be contradicted on social media and things like that. How to go about it, especially that fear. I do have that fear personally.
Yeah. Thank you, Brenda. I think that's a great question and a very real issue. I lean into the idea that people are entitled to their opinions, but they're not entitled to their own version of the facts. And staying steadfast in sharing the evidence as it stands, I think is something that you can lean back on and find comfort in. What we often share as science communicators is not opinions, but simply are disseminators of fact and evidence and what we know to this day. And so I have had many instances, particularly with COVID-19 communication, where people really tried to misrepresent what I said, and or I mean, quite frankly, in many cases, attack me for sharing information about the COVID-19 vaccine and a number of other topics. As recent as 2 weeks ago, I helped debunk a paper that was published on the link between vaccines and autism with Unbiased Science, but it's a newsletter and podcast, and they're also science communicators. It was shared, I think, on a Friday or a Saturday. A Google alert came Sunday evening at midnight that an anti-vax blogger had picked it up and called me a STEM diversity mascot and vaccine propagandist. I think those things really hurt, but ultimately, especially at a time when science is being challenged, I think you hold such power in sharing the evidence and the facts that we know to this day. It so happens that I call it a quote unquote paper because it was published on a WordPress site, which is like you publish, your own website, but proposed as if it were a peer-reviewed publication, and sort of like designed the page in such a way that it could be mistaken for such. And it was a really poorly designed study, but ultimately was cited as evidence for the link between vaccine and autism at the RFK Jr. Senate hearings. And so Thursday, I got a lot of media and press requests to quote on all of the reasons why this paper had been debunked by my colleague and myself. And I think it really provides us an opportunity to reach an audience that might not have read all of the other papers that have been published on the evidence that we have that suggests that vaccines don't cause autism, that are published in peer-reviewed journals, some that are behind paywalls. And so is it a little bit daunting and maybe even scary to share evidence and facts about polarizing topics? Yes. Do I think it's important? Yes.
Thank you on that. Maybe a follow-up question is it like, do you think some people just have the maybe the chance or that to easily have followers or easily get attention if they share something, even if it's meaningless, compared to others? Because I feel sometimes I put up a very important post and somebody but just put something that doesn't make too much sense, maybe related, and then everybody just likes it and just comments and takes it up, while the important facts people just leave it alone. Is there any secret behind social media? Somebody told him that people boost their posts. I don't know how people boost posts, but is there any other secrets trying to get more attention on your post, especially if it's something you're trying to promote?
Yeah, that's another great question. And really, I think makes me reiterate why it's important not to focus on follower accounts or likes or reach, because yes, there are algorithms that will favor posts that are more emotionally charged. One of the things we have to realize about social media is that people really gravitate to extremes, and they gravitate to content that is very emotionally charged in some ways, right? And your content in for science has to be so emotionally compelling and or entertaining that it would pick up on the algorithm and be presented to so many people that you would get lots of likes and reach and so forth. The very early on, especially in science communication, I realized that the letters behind my name had absolutely no meaning to the rest of the world. And actually, we did research on this. So I got funding from the American Heart Association to test influencer trust with evidence-based content from the American Heart Association. And what we found from the survey was that the biggest indicator for whether or not someone engages with the content online is whether or not they trust the individual. So you could be, I am an epidemiologist. I know nothing about fixing cars. But if someone trusts me and has followed me for some time, and I've somehow gained the trust of millions of people, and I say you need to put water in your oil tank, and that's the way in which your car is going to run, some large percentage of the people that follow me and trust me are going to say, oh, yeah, actually, well, Dr. Hidalgo said that this works, and so therefore it must be. And I am not a known I have no expertise in car mechanics, but it has a lot to do with trust. It has a lot to do with the algorithm. And so to the extent that you can focus on why it is that you're sharing the content, why it's important to you, social media is about you and what you want to get across. Worry less about whether or not it's comparable to what some of these bigger accounts are doing. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah.
I wonder if that's also a way of avoiding a fruitless sort of back and forth that can come about, when it comes to certain social media posts. And I think a lot of people, like you said, avoid posting because they don't want to get in the middle of something like that and don't know what they'll do if it starts and don't know how to handle it. Instead of responding to the criticism or responding to the half-truth that's presented, alternatively, could you just create a new post that sort of builds on what you posted before and talks more about why this is important to you or where you got your information? Or I mean, how do you manage it when you want to avoid that confrontation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, some celebrities have taken to completely eliminating the comment option on their posts, right? So they like shut off the comments. In some cases, you can't even see the likes. And so that's one way to control the narrative. And that is one way, Julie, as you mentioned, right, to sort of continue the conversation. You stay the course. You share what you need to share, the content and the perspective that you want to share. And do realize that while some interactions are fruitful, like I had a 9-month back and forth with an individual from the Midwest who had high vaccine hesitancy. And ultimately, because of that 9-month interaction with me of like, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? Did end up, at least based on what he told me, becoming COVID vaccinated. And so did the rest of his family. We can't do that with 140,000 followers or 40,000 followers or even 10,000 followers or even 100. Like no one has the time unless you're dedicating yourself full time to social media. And also I think that it creates some inequity, right? In the time that you're allocating to the back and forth with certain individuals. The thing also to recognize is that these days it's not uncommon for there to be automated bots that leave comments on posts, right? And those are truly just AI generated that are meant to, in some cases, it actually helps boost your post if there are a lot of AI bot comments that end up on your post. But it's meaningless to engage with them because ultimately there's no real person behind that account. In the cases where there are people behind accounts, sometimes the intent is malicious and there is no true genuine curiosity or intent to change their minds, and they're just there to sort of argue with you, also a waste of time. And so the best bet is simply just to the extent possible, engage as much as you can. But really, I think ultimately, if you want to shut off comments or you want to just create another post to deal with the unanswered questions, I think that's the way to go.
And you bring up such an important point about the bots. Thank you. I appreciate that because it's easy to forget.
Yeah, even as a reader, right? Even as a user of social media, if you're not a content creator, I find myself, especially on TikTok, watching a video and then immediately going to the comments. What are people saying about this? And I have to remind myself that not all comments are real people. And, you know, this happens a lot during political, during election time, election season, where companies are literally hired to leave comments and posts, leave comments on posts to sort of generate conversation or take the conversation in a certain direction. And I think we're all sort of prey to falling gullibly into believing that these are all individuals behind these posts, and in some cases they're not. And so we're really faced with dealing with social media at a time when many of us were not trained with media literacy in this space. We learned, for those of us that are older, like The Sun was a publication that you knew was just kind of like fluff, right? Like they posted about Brangelina. You knew that it wasn't real. It wasn't like information about Brad and Angelina Jolie. But that's a little bit harder to discern these days. And so media literacy is something that I think we're all trying to grapple with. Those have been great questions. Thank you. Any others?
I think this is such an important topic because there are a lot of people at UAB that have the ability to communicate really important facts and truths that can change people's lives for the better. And it's been, especially during COVID, it was very disappointing to me the way I felt like some public health leaders sort of fell down on the job and didn't do a good job educating the public in a way that they could understand, and didn't do a good job of educating the media, who was educating in the gap the public.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important that if you have access to truthful, factual, evidence-based information, that you figure out a way to most effectively share that information with others, and to also effectively respond when there are untruths being shared or partial truths. And I always find myself now when it's in writing, like you know, on a social media post, I've got time to sort of collect myself and do a little bit of research before I, you know, answer. But if it's in a conversation and I'm faced with, you know, a conspiracy theory or a partial truth that I really want to address, but it's not the time or place, nor am I prepared. You know, I'm faced with that a lot lately, and I was certainly faced with that a lot during the pandemic. And so I really appreciate your help with this topic. I think it's so important.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, no, the in-person fact checking is something definitely that is so difficult. I've taken the approach that I now say, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Let me look it up. And so I immediately Google, and we'll talk through. I've had the opportunity to talk through with people like, oh, look, this is what it says. And it's actually not what you said. It's something slightly different. And so I have had the opportunity to have fruitful discussions in that area. I do think that some topics you cannot convince people about because they're so emotionally invested that fact and logic are not enough to penetrate and or change their mind. And so I did feel strongly that, and still do, science communication is about putting information out there, and then you let people do with that information what you will. You have done your job. It is not your job to ensure behavior change. It is not your job to ensure that people do the right thing. I lost so much sleep over why people would intentionally put themselves in dangerous situations that would harm their loved ones and even themselves during the height of the pandemic, and ultimately had to acknowledge for myself that people need to do what people need to do, and it's my job simply to share the information and let the rest figure itself out, and that's really difficult to grapple with. But I think the earlier in the process that we acknowledge that, the easier social media sharing becomes.
Thank you. That is so true. And I really appreciate your perspective. I also appreciate you being with us tonight and taking
Oh,
time. I know you're extremely busy, and this has been a really great hour. I know the people participating tonight have enjoyed it, and I know that we're going to be asked a lot for this link, and I'm sure it'll be watched in the days and weeks to come. So, Dr. Hidalgo, thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you all for joining us.